Hey, Cam followers, and look who is back. For the guys that have followed us for years, please meet Stephen again. For the guys that are new to us, please meet Stephen. This dude is epic. Okay, so he is a real leader in this field, and we're extremely lucky to have him with us. So what we're going to do is quickly do a little shout out about a CAM project. And then I'm going to ask Stephen to introduce himself and give us a few ditties of how he's got to where he's got. And then we're going to dive straight in. I have been Captain Sensible again. I have an agenda. We've only got Stephen until just before 8 o'clock because I have another live to do for the big walk and it's a little bit pandemonium. So if you've got questions, do get them in promptly because we're not going to hang over the 8 o'clock margin like we normally do. Quick shout out. If you haven't seen, we have a children's book out. Yes, I am an academically professional person that's going towards the children's sector because I think it's important. So this is a lovely illustrated children's book trying to prevent these unwanted behaviors leading to someone being harmed and the loves of our lives being alienated, potentially rehomed, or even euthanized. So I've been a vet for many years, and I'm afraid to say I've actually had to put many dogs to sleep who have done something because of a pain-related circumstance, but it's been almost unforgettable, unforgivable. So this is a beautiful story. It's a children's book, parents and child to read together, and I'm hoping that we can start dealing with that understanding unless one of the ambassadors gets in there before me. Right, Stephen, over to you and how you've become who you've become.
Oh wow, well that's a loaded question.
Oh, yours.
Am I okay? Is the feed okay?
Yes, it's okay. It's okay.
So yeah, I started out in general practice and then went to specialty practice as a veterinary technician here in the United States. And then a friend, I want to say, coerced me to try research and was kind of against it, especially when we're using animals, because I don't love the idea of using animals in research, but learned to actually love it and learn that I could actually be a very strong advocate for animals in the research setting. So I embraced it. I still love it and still work in research. I have also been in a lot of other facets of the veterinary industry, whether it's zoo, wildlife. I have work in industry. The last time we talked, a little bit over a year ago, actually, I was with a CBD company. And then Stanford University called one day and said, hey, we want you. So not going to turn down that opportunity, and have been doing some really cool projects lately. Most recently, well, one of the most recent projects that finally came out is the book finally came out, Cannabis Therapy and Veterinary Medicine. We have a whole chapter on pain written by some awesome boarded anesthesiologists and specialized veterinary technicians.
Where can we get it? Can we put a link so people can access it?
Yeah, so you can get it on Amazon, or you can get it through the Springer Nature website itself. So it is available, which is really cool. And as I was telling you before we went live, signed on to a project with two of my really close friends and colleagues from the Veterinary Anesthesia Nerds on a new pain management book for veterinary technicians and nurses, or a second edition, I should say. So very, very excited about that. Have some really cool research coming out. I don't want to spoil it too much because I'm still learning and looking at the data from it, but really cool stuff that I think is going to really shake up the veterinary industry and how we care for our patients.
Amazing. Amazing. I told you he's going to be, well, he's somebody to be really trusted with what he says. And, you know, he really blew us away when he was here last time. So I'm hoping that all of you guys get the same feeling of, I understand this area much better, because it isn't trending as much as it used to. So when I last spoke to you, it was like mammoth. Yes. And it feels like it's subsided a little bit, but it's still very, very much there. And there's a lot of people, dare I say, that are profiteering from this sector, be them in hand creams, milkshakes, foods, you name it, CBD features everywhere. Yeah. And trying to distill truth from marketing is very, very difficult. So first of all, okay, let's go straight into it. the UK. So we're based in the UK and you're based over in the US, and there are differences. So here in the UK, the VMD, the Veterinary Medicines Directive, in I think it was February 2019, reclassified CBD as a medicine because of the therapeutic response that we were seeing. And that therefore means that it was to be prescribed by a vet, but there was no product available that had met the regulations to be classified as a medicine for safety and efficacy. So we were in this no man's land where we had to prescribe it, but we didn't have anything to prescribe. And where in the cascade did we prescribe it? So it was a very, very difficult situation. And most vets that do use it at the end of the line. So they use recognized veterinary practice first, such as non-steroidals and adjuncts, and then add it. But we still struggle to have a product that we're allowed to use confidently and comfortably. It's different in the US, isn't it?
Yeah, so we actually have a very similar problem, with the exception that veterinarians cannot prescribe because we don't have an FDA-approved animal product. That, however, does not mean veterinarians can't discuss or recommend products that are considered a nutraceutical or a supplement for an animal. And there's some tricky laws which a lot of companies are taking advantage of or just not respecting, as far as labeling for animal supplements and nutraceuticals. Mm-hmm. Those products, common things like glucosamine or milk thistle for liver health is something that we use in practice all the time. But if you notice those credible labels, they don't have any therapeutic claims. They don't say is going to treat or cure a liver problem. They don't say it's going to fix joint problems. They say may support joint health. So things here in the United States that are legal being sold as animal health supplements or nutraceuticals cannot make a therapeutic claim on the label. So it's kind of this loophole we have here in the United States. And then we also have each state having its own rules when it comes to compounds like CBD or THC or any of these other what are called phytocannabinoids. Recently, actually yesterday, California, the House Assembly just signed and confirmed with the Senate Assembly to make CBD products in California legal for sale in retail stores. Again, not an FDA-approved medication, but they are now allowed to be sold without essentially a restriction in California.
Have they got strict regulations of what's classified as CBD though, and THC content and stuff?
Yeah, the THC content still needs to be below 0.3%. That's our definition of hemp. I know in the UK it's less than like 0.1% THC, and I think most products need to have 0 THC in them. So it is a bit different, but yes, they are restrictive as far as THC content. As far as the levels of CBD in there and accuracy, it's not as strict. I wish it was more strict, but it is, it's a start, which is nice. And we're lucky, at least here in California, the Veterinary Medical Board has put out a flyer on guidance on discussing and legality for veterinarians using cannabinoid-like products. And we also have to remember, you know, there is a difference between what we consider marijuana, sometimes called cannabis in the law, versus something like hemp that has minimal to 0 THC in it.
Yeah. So over here in the UK, it's a really difficult area to be a first opinion vet, because within the time constraints and everything else you have to talk about, you're also trying to explain that, yes, the VMD is saying, no, there should not be any animal CBD products being sold with health claims. However, they're everywhere. They're everywhere.
That was something that the AVMA and a lot of the organized veterinary organizations were really adamant about pushing when this stuff first came out, when it was very, very popular and everyone was talking about it. And I understand that. However, I think they've all come to realize they're in a losing battle because, as you said, these products are everywhere. So now the narrative has shifted from don't ever talk about these things, no, to you need to actually talk about these things and know what you're talking about for the safety of the animal, because regardless of whether you're giving that first opinion or recommendation or prescription, whatever, the pet owner is going to use it. So the time they have around to, they're going to use it regardless of what we say. So I guess we better be responsible and learn about it and be able to have these conversations that we call harm reduction conversations with pet owners.
I agree. I totally agree. And it is really difficult, because at the end of the day, we just want the owners to be making the right decision for their pets. And it's so hard to swim through the minefield of marketing. And, you know, I think I'm quite good at this because I am naive as well. So I get it. I can understand how complex it is, and I can really sympathize. So we've done that. We've done the declaration that it's a sticky wicket at the moment, and different countries have different policies, but we know that people still want to know a lot about it. So now we're going to go from the declaration into the disclaimer, which is that this Facebook Live is not going to be instructing you or telling you or dosing or giving you any guidance to start going and buying it, guys. This is a conversation that you need to be having with your vet, and you need to feel uninhibited to have that conversation. Do not be scared about it. Be brave and have a conversation. If your vet cannot answer your questions, ask if somebody in the practice can do. We have got a CBD handout that you can print off. I'm sure the lovely Laura will put a link, and it will give you some help. The lovely Stephen helped us write it. But please don't be scared to talk to your vets about it, because what we don't want you to do is to go to a well-marketed site with a really poor product, and you either get no benefit whatsoever except a burnt purse, or potentially you could have an adverse reaction because what's in it isn't what's in it, etc. So now that we've done the disclaimer, can we please talk about reasons to seek vet advice with regards to adding it to the treatment regime? So I kind of came up with a few ideas. It's not to scare tactics, it's a reality check, isn't it? So what are the sort of things that you would be saying to your owners of, don't just go alone, please talk to your vet? Why?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You were mentioning in the disclaimer about we're not recommending treatment plans for anyone watching this, and that is incredibly true. You know, I think when I first started in this adventure, I was a little bit more cavalier and willing to be like, yeah, just try this. I'm not that way anymore, because as science has come out, we really know the formulation of these compounds in these products really makes all the difference. So, you know, depending on what are called the phytocannabinoids, those are the things like CBD, even THC, there's 120 other different ones out there. And these things called terpenes, which are the smelly component to these products, which are in a lot of other products that we're using. So like if you're smelling citrusy things, if you're smelling pine-like things, those are all terpenes, those molecules that trigger your little smelling cells, right? And have their own therapeutic advantages and disadvantages. So it's very, very nuanced. And I think pet owners and veterinarians are still kind of in this learning phase of finding which formula, which terpene is going to be best for this specific condition. And then as far as adverse events, one of the worst adverse events we can get is getting no efficacy, you know, other than actual harm, but getting no efficacy and then changing the perception of the person who used its mind, saying, oh yeah, that stuff is garbage, it doesn't work. Well, really, you just chose the wrong product, you were using the wrong dose, and maybe you had it in combination with other medications where there was some competitive drug interaction. So seeking the advice of someone that is well versed in these compounds, I think, is so critical, because there's just so many nuances to these products. And you know, speaking to the marketing of different companies that are out there, it's unfortunate that a lot of our education that we're getting in the veterinary field, and I was part of this, is all fairly biased. It's all being sponsored by these companies, which is fine, because that is their prerogative. But we're not getting a lot of non-biased information out there that isn't being sponsored or presented from the companies that are producing these products themselves. So
yes,
it is so sticky, not only with the legal side of things, but also the nuance of using these things. And then, as you mentioned, just getting through the muck of the advertising and finding really credible information.
It's really hard. And I think I don't want to come across like the CBD police, but I was exactly the same as you. I got sent some about 2 years ago and I was gung-ho. I was, yeah, come on, Holly, take some. And whether it was related to the CBD, whether it was the combination, she was on a non-steroidal, she was on paracetamol, she had major liver surgery, and that was the final straw that actually tipped her balance. And she started having like little partial seizures, but she did have a very, very reduced liver function. She'd had 2/3 of her liver cut out because of a tumor. So she was one of those perfect storms, you know, and there was me gung-ho, and she was close to being put to sleep because I was like, whoa, you know, I don't want you like this. Yeah. So, but once we removed all the medications, cleared the decks and started again, she went back to being Holly. Now that is just an anecdotal story. Okay. Let's show it for what it is. It might have been nothing to do with the CBD, but that just clarifies we still need to know so much more. It is not me planting a seed that you're going to spread through the internet. It is an N=1 situation, but it just shows you we don't know the answers. So please bear that, okay? So let's just continue being the CBD police for a little bit longer before we start talking about the benefits. There was a lot that came out a year to 2 years ago where they actually took a load of high street products and just went, oh, good God. Tell people about that.
Yeah, so not only the High Street study, but we also had a study published here last year with 30 products. And I mean, we just found all kinds of things in them, or we didn't find anything at all in them that was supposed to be there. So you mentioned burning your purse, which is the cutest thing I've ever heard. So I'm for my little idioms here. But yeah, people are burning their purse. You know, they think they are buying CBD products and then there's no CBD in them at all. You know, another problem that we found was there was contaminants of heavy metals in there. So high levels of lead, even such high levels of lead in some of these products, it would be considered unsafe to consume per the United States USB, our safety levels for contaminants in food products. So it's been all over the place. And, you know, I give a little bit of credit to the companies that are using heavy terpenes in their products. So when you open the bottle up and you smell it, it smells like cannabis. You're like, wow, this smells like college or high school again. But in reality, there's no phytocannabinoids in there. They're just using a bunch of terpenes to trick you. So it is concerning. And then the other concerning part with both of the studies is the concentration factor. You know, the bottle is saying this is 50 milligrams per milliliter. This is 5 milligrams per milliliter, when in reality, it's maybe 1 milligram per milliliter, or it's 75 milligrams per milliliter instead of 50 mg per mil, which sounds like a benefit. But if you don't know that as an owner, it can help, or it can, you know, teeter on that line of, I don't want to be alarmist and say overdosing, because it's very hard to overdose with CBD. But, you know, overdosing, getting maybe a different affect from the CBD than you were anticipating because it was a higher concentration versus what the label said. So it is tricky. And I mean, especially for a pet like yours that had 2/3 of the liver removed, is on acetaminophen, which is also using the liver to be metabolized. Those two drugs use very similar enzymes for metabolism, and that can be detrimental. So
perfect storm.
Yeah,
and that's why I say I'm the perfect host, because I have the gullible brain, I have the naive brain, I have the innocent, I'll do anything for my dog part of my brain, as well as maybe a little bit of sensibleness somewhere. And yeah, I fell for it. So, you know, just don't make my mistakes, guys. We're going to definitely talk about spectrums, full, broad. We're also going to talk about research, but I think a really good way to step into the clinical benefits of CBD is to talk about your journey and what sucked you in, because I think that will really lead us into looking at why this is an exciting area. So tell us about what you read, what you did, what you saw, and from there.
Yeah, so my journey actually started here in the Bay Area of California. You know, California is known for being a fairly liberal, progressive state in general. We were one of the first states to have legalized recreational and medicinal cannabis available in the United States. And living in the Bay Area, where it's kind of part of the culture here, it's not uncommon to have someone smoke some cannabis on the street, or it's like alcohol here. It's not surprising, it's not shocking. And with that, we had a lot of pet owners come in with an animal that had severe cancer or some other terminal and painful disease process going on, asking, hey, can I use cannabis in my animal? And, the veterinarians obviously were shying away from that. But I was like, I mean, not to be, dramatic or whatnot, but the animal's going to die anyway.
What are you going to lose?
Let's see if it's going to keep them comfortable. And, some of these animals even had a timeline for when they were going to be euthanized because their quality of life was so poor. And then they would start these cannabis products, mostly CBD products, low THC. And this timeline would expire, and I'd call them and say, hey, what's going on? I'm not trying to force you to put your animal down, but I had this conversation. We were concerned about the quality of life. And they'd say, oh, well, since starting this product, they are doing really well. And it's a change for us. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And I was like, well, I want to see some evidence behind that. And at that time, there really wasn't a lot of clinical small animal literature out there available, but there was a lot of preclinical and research kind of based discovery type research out there. So I was like, oh, well, this is really interesting, and started learning about the endocannabinoid system and how elegant it is and how it's involved in all of these different things throughout our physiology. I was like, this is really interesting. So that's when I found out about the first company that I worked for, or the second company that I worked for, and how they were sponsoring some of the research out of Cornell University, which I thought was really cool. And yeah, it just kind of snowballed from there.
What about, so because of the timeline and because I want to get as much into this in our limited space of time, you talked about the elegancy of the endocannabinoid system. Please, can you explain that? Because that's beautiful what you've just said. Just help people understand what these products do.
Sure. Yeah, so the endocannabinoid system is the set of receptors that things like CBD and THC and some of these other phytocannabinoids sit on. And we know when you have a receptor and you have a compound that can sit on there, you get some sort of effect. Just like morphine sits on opioid receptors, we get a pain relieving effect. So it's the same kind of idea with these compounds, except the endocannabinoid system is one of our most ancient receptor systems that we have in our body. And it's the largest G-coupled protein receptor system within our body, which is really cool. And it also not only does its own thing as the endocannabinoid system itself, but it does a lot of regulation and monitoring of other receptor systems. So I mentioned the opioid receptors, right, for morphine. It interacts with those morphine receptors. You get what's called dimerization, or you get when you turn on one receptor, another receptor turns on because that receptor is now active, which is really, really cool. We know that the endocannabinoid system is really, really involved in your GI. There's some really cool research. It certainly wasn't out the last time we talked, looking at how the endocannabinoid system, how important it is as far as immune response, because we know the GI is super important for immune response to things. It's involved in pain, which is so crazy to me. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how the GI and having a bad microflora in your GI can actually impact chronic pain and even acute pain in some cases, and even behavior for that matter. So the endocannabinoid system is involved in all of that. We also know that some of the compounds that we are working with as far as things like CBD and the endocannabinoids, so the molecules that the body produces to work on the endocannabinoid system, are, I like to use the word promiscuous, and they like to hang out with other receptors and can agonize them or antagonize them to create other physiological benefits, or sometimes non-benefits to the animal, depending on what we're talking about. So it's one of the most ancient receptor systems we have. It's odd that it just wasn't studied and really taught to us.
So followers, I never heard about this at uni. This was not taught, and it was almost like what are you all talking about?
Yeah, and even since the last time we talked, at the time there were 2 studies out focused on osteoarthritis and using CBD for osteoarthritis at that time. There are now 7 that have been published. And it's really cool to see all these other studies that weren't necessarily looking at CBD use or whatever, but all these studies now are mentioning the endocannabinoid system. And I'm like, people are catching on now because it is so critical to the normal function and physiology of all our other receptor systems. So I'm glad it's finally getting this attention.
Yeah, great. So I'm a bit perturbed because 7, I was like, oh, crikey, I thought there was 3. Now I feel like really on the back foot. And are these 7 studies about chronic pain, or are they studies in small animals about a myriad of diseases, all chronic pain?
So there are 7 specific studies for OA specifically. And that's that's not even mentioning all the other studies that have come out on skin and whatnot. So that is 7 specific to OA.
Amazing. So where I left off was 2 were positive and 1 was no beneficial effects, and we were like, oh wow, that's so we were going la la la, and then ooh. So what's happened since then? It's almost like a drama.
So now we're at 6 to 1. So 6 positive, and then the 1 so-so. Was the 1 so-so one the CSU one that you're
I believe so.
Yeah. So it's now 6 to 1, which is kind of interesting. And I think that really, I was talking about the nuances of using these products, the importance of the makeup of these products. All 7 of those studies were using very different products. And I think that really speaks to the efficacy of these different products. I'm wondering if they did the same study that the Colorado State University study that was kind of mixed, wasn't super positive, wasn't bad, but just wasn't great. I'm wondering if they used in that same study, same model, same design, a different product, if they would have the same outcome. So it's really cool to see this difference. We've also had a couple of behavioral studies that have come out. One was suggestive that it would be positive and a worthwhile thing to look into as far as aggression for animals in a shelter setting. The other one, I think the design was really poor, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, but they were using it for noise phobia. Unfortunately, they took animals out of a shelter setting and only acclimatized them for like 2 weeks, and then they threw them in a big loud box and put thunder and lightning sounds in there. So I think any real veterinary professional knows, like, taking an animal out of a shelter setting and acclimating it for 2 weeks is wholly insufficient. Regardless of what you give them, those endorphins and the adrenaline kicks in, especially in a scary situation. And, I've seen animals that were on gabapentin or dexmedetomidine. When they're super anxious and super worked up, it seems like they're on no drug at all. So I think we're getting that same kind of effect in that particular study.
Yeah, definitely. That does seem like high expectations for 2 weeks for that kind of level of trauma. No. So that's really, really cool. And don't mean to be rude, but the 6 studies, strong size, what were they like? Because I think a lot of owners don't realize, and I didn't realize, the power of a study and the strength is definitely in the numbers. And a lot of the studies that we relate to are very small. They're very, very small. So what kind of size studies were these?
Unfortunately, all the studies are small. They're 20 or less animals, or around that 20. In a perfect world, in the human world, if it's like less than 10,000 patients, that power, it's not a super credible study. Unfortunately, in veterinary medicine, a lot of our studies, even our non-cannabis CBD focused studies, are small. So we do have to understand that we have to take things, with maybe a pinch of salt, maybe not necessarily a grain of salt.
You don't take it with a pinch of salt.
So we do have to be careful with interpretation there. But there have been some really interesting studies as far as safety and escalating doses that make me feel comfortable. So regardless of whether we see a clinical benefit for a specific condition, I know that at least these products, a quality product, is going to be relatively safe for cats and dogs. And Canopy Animal Health funded those particular studies. And I think they were really well done. And they actually answered a question. I'm not going to take credit for it, but I was preaching this for a few years, saying that I'm concerned about CBD use with animals that have increased eye pressure, intraocular
I
pressure.
remember this, yes.
Yeah. So in that study specifically, they looked at that and they found that is not necessarily occurring, at least in dogs, to a point of concern. So I'm hoping they're listening. It sounds like they're listening and they're providing some answers. So I have myself evolved on this topic based on some of the research. So at least the safety studies right now are showing that regardless if it's working for the thing you're trying to use it for, it is relatively safe.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, being Captain Cynical Pants, the only things, so it's safe, but there's the purse burning, which can stop people spending money elsewhere. And there's also the delay in that people would rather purchase something online rather than see their vet for maybe financial reasons, accessibility reasons. And that animal is going, can you take away this pain? Oh, I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting. And the owner, because they're giving a medication, supplement, nutraceutical, whatever you want to call it, they perceive that it's working. So the caregiver placebo. So that would be, so I totally agree with you. It's lovely to know that we're not going to actually be having physiological adverse events, but please take note of real life adverse events of no effect and spending your money, or maybe self-medicating for the wrong diagnosis. Right. So by not seeing your veterinarian, you believe them slowing down is OA, but it's actually a splenic tumor. So those are sort of things. I'm just being Captain Cynical Pants and make people be practical.
I agree.
Cool. Okay, so let's go back to the question about spectrums, and people are going, what are they talking about? But I think you really alluded to it massively when we were talking about those 7 clinical studies. There is a lot of products out there. And I tried to write our handout and I got myself in a pickle of all the different spectrum products. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so it is tricky because as we were talking about earlier, marketing can be difficult to muck through. And I've noticed a trend within the industry, the manufacturing industry. They're trying to change the narrative on the definitions of these spectrums of products that are out there. So as a researcher of cannabinoids, with, I feel like, the less adulterated definition, an isolate product is a single compound or single molecule product. So those are usually things that are just CBD. We're now starting to see things that are CBG, cannabigerol. They are a single compound. Those types of products are not something I would use personally as a first line product for an animal, because you typically need to use a higher dose of an isolate product compared to a broad or a full spectrum product. A full spectrum product is a product that has all the phytocannabinoids and terpenes in it that the plant has to offer. So it likely is going to have a small amount of THC in it as well. But when we, at least in the pain management world, especially for OA, we talk a lot about multimodal analgesic plans or schemes, right? So when you have a full spectrum thing, it's kind of like creating this multimodal
within the multimodal. I love that.
Yeah, within this one product, which is really, really cool. And my dog, as I mentioned before we went live, recently passed, and I got to play a lot with these different phytocannabinoids. And what I think ended up keeping him really comfortable at the end of the day was that little bit of THC that I started introducing to him. So full spectrum products have all the things that the plant has to offer. Broad spectrum has most of the things, or maybe just a couple of the things out there. I'm a purist and believe that broad spectrum should have a majority of the things that the plant had to offer, with the exception of a few of the cannabinoids or terpenes that get lost during processing. However, this is where the marketing can get really tricky. A company can still call a product a broad spectrum product, even if it has only 2 compounds in it, instead of the 60 plus that they, at least in my opinion, should have in them.
Wow.
So it is tricky, you know, even if they have just CBD and maybe a little bit of like linalool, which is a terpene, they can call it technically a broad spectrum product, which is very disingenuous and disheartening, I think, especially as a practitioner and trying to help consumers with their animal.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think for me, being quite naive in the subject, I just sit there reading labels going, oh my God, I'm lost. And then you go for the certificate of analysis and you realize that you don't know what is a solid certificate of analysis. There's not a regulatory body of that is the emblem, that is the logo, that is the address of a lab. Because there's different certificates of analysis from different labs that you've never heard of. It's a minefield, isn't it?
It is. And, you know, at least in the United States, I'm happy to say that past couple of years, we do have somewhat of an identifier for these quality labs and producers of certificates of analysis, which, by the way, if anyone's unfamiliar with a certificate of analysis, it's essentially an ingredients list and a concentration list of what's actually in the product. And they're usually produced by third-party companies. But as Dr. Hanna was saying, like, it can be difficult to assess if this is a quality COA. And here in the United States, we now have a regulatory body. And so we look for third-party labs that are 17025 certified.
Wow.
And I do have a resource. I don't know is it fine if I mention the website?
Yeah, of course you. Yeah, 100%.
So my colleague, Liz Houston, a brilliant cannabis expert as well, we built a website called VetCan Academy, VETCANN Academy.com. And we have how to read a certificate of analysis.
Amazing.
An example of a certificate analysis on the website. So we're trying to put useful, non-biased, non-influenced information on that website.
Perfect. Yes, because that's what we do need. And like what we talked about at the beginning, not talking about it is not going to get us anywhere. This is a topic that is very difficult to advise on, but we shouldn't be pushing it under the pillow. We need to be trying to help and guide people. So yes, we'll make sure we'll put a link. Just to make sure I don't miss people's questions, because I'm always conscious of time. The lovely one from the Luke the lovely. Luke is lovely. He's a hairdresser. He's an amazing hairdresser. A relative uses CBD and has to leave 3 hours after any medication before she can take CBD. Is that similar in animals?
I do not buy into that waiting before or after using primary medications. I think it's important to understand what medications you're using and if there's a potential for drug interaction. We have a little bit of information on that website that I mentioned to you earlier. But I do not believe that we need to wait between dosing of a cannabinoid product and a typical pharmaceutical drug.
Yeah, because where did that come from? Because it's there was a lot to do with about how it's absorbed and first pass metabolism. Oh, it was.
Yeah, I don't know. We have multiple studies showing that's not really a thing. You know, the other myth that we were all encountering was, you know, it needs to be under the tongue, and
yes,
it was part of a study showing that it's actually better given with a little bit of food. And now there's multiple studies showing that, yeah, it is better given with food. It's better absorbed. Even with food. So yeah, there's a lot of these things. I'm not really sure where they came from, but it's that what I would say is false. You don't need to wait.
Perfect. Well, the great thing is that we can send people to your website, and you've got a Facebook page as well, haven't you? That
Yes.
You're always busy on. I once mentioned to Stephen, send me some papers. Oh my God, I used the whole ream of an A4. It was just like, wow. So and he reads all of it. I'm sitting there going, oh, I'll just flick through this.
Now they're all condensed in this. So
I'm going to get that. I am going to get that. Cool. We've got another good and specific question, which tells us that we've got a very mixed audience tonight, which is fantastic. Are you able to speak on THC being estrogenic and possibly causing tumors to grow if the cancer is hormone driven? What do we know about that?
Whoever submitted this question is awesome, and I am so glad that you submitted this question, because this is a problem I'm having with some of my colleagues who I highly respect and love, even within the veterinary field, that are really pushing a lot of THC use. I have no hesitation or concerns about using THC for fun, for using it in certain palliative situations. However, when it comes to cancer, I am very, very concerned, because it can be estrogenic, it can be proliferative for certain types of cancers. And we have a lot of that information from human cell lines and rodent cell lines, not necessarily cat and dog, but if cancers are similar across species, which they are, I think we have the same concerns. In particular, squamous cell carcinomas in people, any head or kind of neck tumors or cancers, THC has shown to be proliferative for those types of cancers. So I'm very, very concerned when people are like, you need THC to kill cancer, when the data is not suggesting that. There's even some really interesting papers looking at low or zero THC products actually being as beneficial, if not more beneficial, than products with THC. So I'm a big believer that when we're talking about cancer, I do try to stay away from THC unless I am certain this is a palliative care situation, or that this specific cancer is not going to increase in size because of THC addition.
I love that, because I can remember I did screenshot craziness when the CBD massive, it was trending, it was crazy, and the claims people were making on forums was incredible, because this might as well do your housework as well. It was epilepsy, it was cancer, it was pain, it was skin quality, it was cognitive dysfunction, and it bakes cakes. And I was just like, wow, this is crazy that people think that it does everything. And it showed us that we still had a lot to learn, in my mind. But people do run with stories very well. I think it's human nature to impart advice and to wish to help others, and also be top of the tree and know a little bit more than somebody else. So it was coming out thick and fast, wasn't it, on these forums?
Yes, it was.
Okay, another good question. Would you give CBD to an elderly arthritic dog with liver disease?
It depends. In your example that you shared earlier, with 2/3 of the liver gone, I'm not sure about the rest of the liver enzymes and the health of the liver, but I would be cautious. Like most medications, especially if animals have liver disease, we definitely need to adjust the dose. So if we are going to be using a cannabinoid product in an animal with liver disease, I would use a very, very small dose. I always say to start low and go slow anyway, but I would probably go even lower. Half of that low dose I would typically give, and see how the animal responds, and then certainly be very cautious and recommend liver testing values every 3 months even, especially if the animal has known liver disease. However, there are some interesting studies. They are in vitro studies looking at cirrhosis of the liver, or cells with cirrhosis, and finding that CBD can be reparative. However, that is just looking at a CBD isolate. It is not looking at these full or broad spectrum products. So I can't say that these other phytocannabinoids or even terpenes or flavonoids, whatever else is in the product, is going to be non-harmful. So
just clarify for people the difference between in vivo and in vitro, because again, this is a common hiccup. So if you're looking at something online, be it a nutraceutical, be it a drug, be it whatever, and you see a list of references, and first of all, I've told you to look at the numbers. If there's 4 dogs in the study, possibly a bit weak. But also, if the study is only referring to in vitro, what does that mean, and why should people be a little bit concerned?
Yeah, so in vitro essentially means a petri dish. It's not a whole living creature. In vivo means the whole living animal or creature. So, the really good quality studies are the in vivo studies, the preliminary stuff or suggestive information that would spur us to maybe look into an in vivo study. Those are the things done in vitro with plated cells in a very controlled setting, looking at only those particular cells, not the whole being.
Yeah, and I think for me, being a naive little monkey, I kind of it's very easy to look at a statement that someone's made, and there's a huge array of references, 15, 20. And it's quite common that they are in vitro, and loads of studies that have been done all around the world that people have dug really deep to find. But you look through them and there's nothing there to say in a cohort of 100 Labradors in there, 10 and above. So we are lacking that kind of evidence. And I think people just need to be cognizant of it. This leads us brilliantly into what I wanted to talk about, which is dosing and time to effect, because I strongly feel there's a lot of products out there, not just CBD, that are well marketed, but they take a long time to work. And the dog is our main concern. And the dog's going, I hurt now.
Yep.
Where are we at with time to effect, etc.?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I do like to start low and go slow, but for animals that are an obvious discomfort, and that is your goal to treat or help with that discomfort, I do think you can be, because of the safety profile of these quality products, can be a little bit more aggressive. So a lot of the studies out there, specifically looking at OA, were hanging out around the 2 milligram per kilogram dosing, which is very similar dosing or the same dosing to a lot of common non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. When doctors are buying these new non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, they're often dosing or they're formulated to dose at 2 milligrams per kilogram, just because it's easy for us to remember.
Yeah.
So a lot of the OA studies using things like CBD have kind of followed this trajectory of trying to hang out the 2 mg per kg arena. Where that came from, I'm not really sure, because it doesn't really make sense to me, but it does, at least in those studies that are published, seem to work for at least 6, 7-ish type products out there. So I think that's a reasonable place to start. Because I'm a little bit more cautious with things, I typically like to start at 0.5 milligram per kilogram twice a day and increase that over a week to maybe get up to that 2 milligram per kilogram, because there's this other nuance to the endocannabinoid system that I talked about earlier, which is super elegant. And the endocannabinoid system has this thing called the endocannabinoid system tone. And the endocannabinoid system tone is essentially how active or inactive your endocannabinoid system is. So I talked about the receptors, but there's also these endocannabinoids. There's also these enzymes that either start or break down these endocannabinoids, and that also interact with things like CBD within the body. So depending on your endocannabinoid system tone, you can have a different effect. I've seen animals that have, it looks like the same level of discomfort in their back hips. I can start one animal at 0.5 mg per kg twice a day, and it seems to work perfect for them, while the other animal may need to go up to 3 milligrams per kilogram. So it is going to be patient variable, just like we see in people when they're trying to use it medicinally or recreationally.
So that then brings us back to, it's no different to anything else where we need to be objective. Yep. And it's not a wonder drug where you can just park it. Hey, they're just going to put this and I'm never going to think about it again. Like with many of the chronic pain, medications, the gabapentin, the pregabalins, the amantadines, it is a titration to effect. It is observed. What's it doing? What do we need to change? Do we need to increase the frequency? We do need to change the dose. So just be sensible, guys. Get your clinical metrology instruments, your questionnaires, do observe whether it's having an effect. So now, because we've only got a few minutes, we're going to go for this, which I love it. Do you know what? The questions tonight have come in perfectly like my agenda. It couldn't have gone any better. I love this. So let's talk about interactions. We're not going to speak specifically about Librela because Librela is still quite new. Librela, non-steroidals, other chronic pain medications. Do we have adverse events? Are we to be concerned about combinations?
Yeah, so the research so far as combination with non-steroidal anti-inflammatories looks to be good. It doesn't look like there's any major concern, which is odd because some of the formulas, especially if they have what are called the acidic forms, of the products, they can act similarly to a steroid. And many of us know that you do not combine a steroid and a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory together. So it is interesting because some of the phytocannabinoids have those properties, but so far, at least in the studies that I've read and been a part of, this doesn't seem to be an issue, which is good. As far as other drugs like gabapentin you mentioned, we can certainly see some increased lethargy, especially if you start them at a kind of a higher dose of CBD. If you did start them at that, 2+ milligrams per kilogram, you might have a very sleepy animal on your hand for a few days, maybe a couple of weeks until they adjust, or maybe you need to dose adjust the gabapentin and or the CBD product. So lethargy seems to be the most common side effect, followed by GI symptoms, which is usually a cause from the carrier oil. So a lot of these products are in an MCT oil or a
oh my God, you just did it again. You're following the flow. Well done here.
Awesome. That can cause some GI upset. So it's something that we need to be aware of as pet owners and consumers when buying these products, is understanding, does your animal have a sensitivity to corn? I've even seen corn oil stuff, which is kind of weird. So it is important to understand all those little nuances of the product, and certainly other medications they're on.
Yeah, definitely. I love it. Okay, so now is a corker, being that you are not just a CBD expert, you also are a pain expert. So CVPP, guys, he is a certified veterinary pain practitioner. And what would you do, in honesty, working in a practice in California? A new client comes in, it's a 10-year-old Labrador, front end heavy, splayed toes, mane, back end's kind of swinging in the wind, loss of muscle mass, and they've been on nothing. They're literally walking in the door. Where do you sit? And I'm totally free range here because I just want to try and keep us multimodal, but honest opinion, what would you be thinking?
If an animal came into my clinic like that, I would ask the owner, have you noticed these changes and what are your thoughts on them? Because I think it's important to understand where they're at with how their animal is acting. And some people are naive to, oh, this is pain. I had no idea. I just thought it was my animal getting old. And seeing where they're at as far as where they want to go with treatment, because we have very invested owners and then we have some less invested owners, and what kind of plan is going to be best for the animal and best for their lifestyle. Because we certainly have the owners, if it was a perfect world, I'd say, let's put them on these 5 things. Let's send them to physical therapy 3 times a week. Let's get all these other kind of things going. But to some people, that's completely impractical. They have a very busy business life. They're gone for several hours of the day, and they can really only give things twice a day to their animals. So I need to understand where the pet owner is going to be and what we can actually offer this animal. But in my ideal world, I think minimum we would have some sort of physical therapy at least once a week, maybe every other week, and certainly have a physical therapist, or physiotherapist is what you call them.
We call them physiotherapists. Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully teach the owner how to do some exercises or massage at home for their pets, because I'm really starting to get more interested in these non-pharmacological approaches to managing pain in animals for a number of reasons. One, it's something that the animal owner can do to create that bond with their animal and actually feel the impact of helping their animal. I'm getting emotional thinking about that. It's so bonding. I love it. But also, I would look at their diet. We mentioned earlier, having a quality diet is really, really important for maintaining GI health and keeping that microbiome happy and healthy, and assessing all the little things, looking at it holistically instead of just like, you have OA, you have hip dysplasia, you have whatever it is. Let's only focus on that. Let's look at the whole animal
Yes.
Treat the whole animal, and then we can start kind of targeting that specific condition, because sometimes when we're treating the whole animal, it might make that specific condition better, where maybe we don't need to hit them as hard with the dose of NSAIDs or the dose of gabapentin or the dose of CBD.
Yes.
So that would be my approach.
I love that. And I didn't actually prep you for that at all. I put you on the spot. And you
have been winging this whole thing, so that is fun.
I know, this has gone absolutely swimmingly tonight. Now, there's been a few more questions that sadly I can't do tonight. Stephen can't do, partly because we've got the big walk on, and me and the amazing Kathy Murphy, who's over there, are just about to go live on the Big Walk page, guys. So do hop over if you're a big walker. But what I will do is make sure I read the questions, and if I can answer them, I will do. If not, I will ask Stephen to just contribute. Stephen, you're amazing. Thank you so much. I absolutely, definitely love you muchly. And I'm going to be gin and tonicking with you very soon.
And I'm going at 6 a.m. for our board meeting.
I know. It's going to be 2 p.m. for me, so I can gin and tonic my heart out. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. You've been fantastic, polite, and brilliant questions. Always good with the cam followers. We will see you guys next week. Promise I'll answer the questions. Till then, see you later.
Thank you so much. Bye.